Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to to Abe, what's the show's title?
You can't remember?
No, it's on the tip of my tongue.
I think it's like atoms.
From Adams
From atoms
to Eve. No,
No, that's from
Not-
Adam to Eve.
that's not it. From Adams,
To axons
starring Bilal Hamoud.
and Ibrahim Shahrur.
That's it.
Why'd that happen?
Why did I forget? Or why was it on the tip of my tongue? Well, that brings us to our topic for today, ladies and gentlemen. See that segue? It was nice and clean. Memory. How does memory work? What makes memory valuable? What makes us us? Is it memory? And more importantly, are our memories accurate? So, there's a very interesting syndrome that's referred to as tip of the tongue syndrome. It is the phenomenon of failing to retrieve a word from memory, combined with partial recall. So kind of when you know the first letter of the word, you know it's like t, but you can't remember what it is. It's an interesting phenomenon because there's a name behind it. It's like something that's talked about in the scientific community because why? Why can we only partially remember something? What firing neuron is like missing? What's not clicking up there?
Right, you know it's legit once it has a name, and
Once the scientific field recognizes it, it's legit. That's why I still no longer value Drake. I'm waiting. So, Abe, how do you feel about memory?
I think memory is what keeps us going every day because it's what makes us assume that today, I have to go to this place. I have a meeting with this person because I remember that we agreed to that meeting, and so I rely on my memory to live my life. So without memory, I'm completely lost.
But it's more than just remembering a meeting or an event or staying organized. It's much more. It's remembering your name, who you are, where you are, spatial memory, functional memory, memory that lets you complete tasks throughout the day.
Exactly, yeah.
So that kind of brings me into the topic of what would happen if we didn't have memory? What would happen if we had short-term or long-term memory loss? Well, the first way to get into that is to discuss what is memory, specifically what is short-term memory and what is long-term memory. Well, short-term memory is the ideas or lists of items or things that you have in your direct mind, things that you can see that you can cognitively perceive,
Be aware of.
Yeah, things that you are aware of, nothing in your subconscious, but very aware of them. Things tend
And
to
your direct perception.
exactly that usually stays within the field of 7 plus or minus 2 items. So if you have to memorize a list, now this expands if you have to memorize a group. So if you're grouping a list of things, it can expand the number of things you can remember. And that goes into techniques of how you can do memory. We have a friend out there, an avid listener, Chloe, who can apparently memorize the exact order of a deck of cards, the entirety of it. And not just, a new deck of cards, because I can do that too, but like a completely randomly shuffled one. It is highly impressive. We'll have to have her on the show, and people will just have to take our word for it.
Yeah, she has to tell us all about the techniques involved in doing such a...
I think it's something she referred to as a mind palace, which I always thought was just something from the show Sherlock, but apparently it's an actual thing of going into this mental image you present in your mind and referencing these items. So then they're not only stored in short term anymore, but quickly being consolidated, because that's the process of taking a short term memory and making it into a long term memory. It's consolidation.
Mm-hmm.
So consolidating it into a long term memory and being able to quickly retrieve it. So it's not like her short term memory is full of these 52 cards, different suits, different numbers. It's quick process. It's the, it's a trick, I guess.
Right.
The quick process of being able to consolidate a memory and quickly retrieve it and back and forth without having delay, using this quote-unquote mind palace.
Mind palace, interesting.
So then we get into long-term memory. Long-term memory at that point is memory that has been consolidated from short-term memory. Ideas, anything, your name, everything about you, what you did last week. But then there's also long-term memories we don't remember, things that don't get consolidated. Why? Because they're not important. Things that don't have value to us. So, do you remember what you ate exactly a week ago?
I do not.
Do you remember what you did 1,300 days ago?
I absolutely do not remember that.
So, it's these types of things that you wouldn't remember. But then, if I asked you what you did 6 years ago on your birthday,
I would probably know, yeah.
Right, that's significant to you. And
so the more emotion involved?
Exactly. Emotion tends to tie to memories, smells. If you ever wonder why when you smell cooking or smell something you haven't smelled in a long time, you instantly remember the last time. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, Mom's cooking this again? I can't wait.
Like when I visit my grandma's house, I get this nostalgia, like when I was young, because I didn't live here for 18 years, but I used to come here for the summers, and then I would spend a lot of my time at my grandma's house. And so when I came here in 2015, it was like a whole different experience. I just remembered a lot about my childhood. That was pretty interesting. And then you were talking about short-term and long-term memory, and I immediately remembered that I have this computer in front of me in my laptop, and the way it stores memory is extremely similar to that, because if people have heard of the term RAM and
random access memory?
Exactly. Random access memory is the sort of the short-term memory for a computer, because whenever you're doing something on a computer and say you hit the keys on your keyboard, then you're not using the hard drive memory. You're actually just using this random access memory that the computer just,
like
briefly
a temporary
uses.
space.
Temporary space, exactly. And then once you're done with your task, then the memory is just wiped out and it's ready to take in new tasks. And then for the long-term memory, it's stored in the hard drive. And that takes a lot of work to actually change and alter.
That's why if I have a hard drive versus a solid-state drive, my information can be instantly accessed versus taking time on a hard drive, because it has to get into the disk, find the information, translate that information, that's the key word, translate it, back into some usable form that I can see, and then I finally get my data. And although it's happening at lightning speeds, it's still not quite, fast enough to be instant. But then again, our memory could be comparable to that, right?
I think so. But then how do we store memory in our brains as compared to, say, a computer, which stores them in bits or binary digits, zeros and ones?
Well, we could get down to the basics of DNA and how much data there is in DNA.
But I think we're more interested in the memory side of the brain, or humans, perhaps, because once you start talking about a computer and how it stores memory, then it's basically a string of zeros and ones, right? And then those are chopped up into sort of 8 bits, which make 1 byte.
Right.
And for each byte, it's sort of translated into some piece of information that we all agree upon. Say, a 0110110, hopefully that was 8, is like an A, is the letter A.
Oh, so what you're saying is it's like a sequence of ones and zeros, which mean yes or no, and they are put in a string, and that string is read, and that string of characters is translated into one character or one color, one pixel, one something, and it's dependent on how many ones and zeros and how the order is.
Exactly. The sort of agreed upon convention is like 8 bits make a byte. And
then
did you know that 4 bits make a nibble?
But 2. Is that a real thing?
That's a real thing.
I actually really like that. So whether you're making bytes, bits, or nibbles, memory, I think, could be comparable, at least computer memory could be comparable to that of human memory. So if human memory is similar to that of computer memory, where every yes, every 1 is a synapse firing, and every 0 is a synapse not firing, like an action potential.
Right.
Would that mean our memory could be comparable to that of a computer?
I have some doubts about that, because if I look at, say, a structure of the brain and I see a bunch of neurons conglomerating at a certain point, then from what I know is that if a neuron has some potential on it, and say it's a 1 state, and some other neuron does not, then there's some sort of cancellation going on. Because sometimes you need multiple neurons to act at once in order to get the next one to fire. There's some sort of threshold. But with a computer, I'm not sure it works the same way. So it's not so easy to link the two in such a
Mm-hmm. So it's not, they're similar in a sense, but not the same by any means.
yeah, exactly.
So I guess that could translate into this article I saw. It's another article featured on Psychology Today, remembering something that never happened. And we'll go more into this later on in this segment, but a brief topic they discuss is how memories are really represented in the brain. And it's very interesting. It's not just stronger associations of neurons, stronger bundle fibers of neurons, ones that fire together, that wire together, that have formed, stronger bonds. It's not just that, but it's also on a chemical basis. It's a chemical basis of different numbers of protons and different numbers of neurotransmitters attached to these neurons, like very much associated with them, and it's these chemical balances in the brain that are forming your memories as well. It's a mixture of these, and it's so complex. Only recently, like very, very recently, have we been able to take raw data from a brain and try and translate it back into the image that the brain is looking at. And it's interesting because it's not by any means accurate, but it has the outline of the figure. It has similar colors, and you're able to kind of translate some of the data, but definitely by no means a clear picture.
So it's like a first attempt at
It's
trying to decipher what's going on.
It's like a first attempt at a photo, like when we first, photography first started. It's kind of interesting to see the similarities. And I wonder if it'll ever get to the point that photography is at now, 4K memory resolution, being able to recall a memory or record a memory.
Recording a memory.
How cool would that be?
I just remembered something. Last night you said you were going to give me $100, right?
I don't recall that. I think you're misremembering.
Oh, never mind.
So misremembering is, I think that was Abe's transition right there. Good job, Abe. Misremembering is a big topic that we're going to talk about because misremembering is probably one of the most dangerous things because that is where fake news has its most
potency.
I'd say so, yeah. And where a lot of confusion can occur in very important settings. Because think about how important it is that our memory stays accurate.
It's very important, especially when it comes to testimony.
Right.
Because then people rely on other people's testimony being accurate and their memories corresponding to reality.
And our court systems now rely on those, personal visual testimonies that someone saw something occur. And we have to be able to take that at face value, even though we know for a fact that it isn't accurate most of the time. And this article that we have very much goes into detail about a study they conducted where they planted a false memory in someone's mind, and because of the way memory consolidation works in long-term memory, it was they believed that memory to be true, even though it had never happened, nothing similar had happened.
So they tricked them into believing something that happened that didn't actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Which is a scary thought.
That's really scary.
What is memory truly? Is it just a idea that grows in your mind to be personally customized to you, or is it?
Does it actually have to happen?
Right. It's kind of scary. Which is why I think pathological liars are so scary, because they no longer know what truth is because of the lies that they start to believe, that they tell themselves. And they go down this path of lying and lying and lying, and you can never know what's true. They can't even know what's true because of how often they do it and how disassociated from any person they could be, any sort of individual with their own distinct traits that they could be, because they've never had an accurate, consistent reputation that they portray.
Right.
So, Abe, if you'd like, we can hop into this article right now.
We could, yeah. Why don't you just get it started? And
Sure. Well, MIT scientists have investigated how false memories form, and that's where this article comes from. Now, what's really cool is that the study that they do, and I'm just going to read this first paragraph here. We know that memories can't be trusted based on TV courtrooms and dramas, but in truth, memories are at best sensory and emotional impressions blurred by imagination, belief, ambiguity, and time. These are very interesting because time is a big one. Time plays a bigger role than you'd expect, but also the process of recalling that memory is what has the most substantial effects. Now let's continue. As convincing as juries may find testimony of a witness, good prosecutors know that human memory is, more often than not, the least reliable source of evidence. Now that's kind of interesting considering that's what court is about, someone suing someone over something that occurred that they believe to occurred.
Right, that's an absolute statement. It says it's the least reliable source of evidence. Like
that's what
pretty
jurors take into account, which is kind of interesting. So for one, attitudes and beliefs can affect memories we form. Scientists at Cornell University told college students a story about a man who walked out on a restaurant bill. Now, half the participants were told that the man was a jerk who would like to steal, and half were told that the man left without paying because he received an emergency phone call. 1 week later, the people who were told he was a jerk remembered a higher bill from $10 to 25% more than the bill actually was. And then those who were told he had an emergency phone call remembered a slightly lower bill than actually was. So their perception of the details of the situation were completely based on how they felt about the person, if they felt he was a good guy or a bad guy based on his situation.
How he was represented.
Mm-hmm. And so then it says negative. This is where they bring in the term negative evaluations. They conclude are capable of exerting a distorting effect on memory. So you see even the difference. A slightly lower bill when it's a positive memory, but a substantially 25% higher bill when it's a negative memory. So it goes to show how negative emotions have much more of an impact on our memory than positive ones.
So it's a skewed thing. It's not symmetric.
Right. That's why if I call you pretty every day for the next 30 years of your life, you'll be like, he always does it. But when I call you ugly that one day because you're wearing that Puma shirt again, that same gosh darn Puma shirt, then you remember it forever because it was that substantial and it was that much, more impactful because it's a bad memory in your eyes.
It's also a great shirt.
It's
a subjective.
It's a shirt. It's a shirt. It's objectively a shirt. So then we continue on, and it says, is it even possible to remember something that never really happened? There's another experiment where researchers showed volunteers an image and asked them to imagine one or other images at the same time. So later, many of the volunteers recalled the imagined images as real, using functional magnetic resonance imaging. So that's where you can see the brain, live in its activity and see what regions are getting activated. So they scan the brain and they're looking at it while the participants are doing some sort of task. Now the researchers were able to determine which parts of the brain form the false memories and which form the real ones. So that's kind of interesting. They're able to see where false memories are made and where the real ones are. Because one is memory, something that actually occurred, and one is our imagination making things up.
I thought that memory would be sort of interlinked, and you wouldn't be able to pinpoint where memory is actually stored in the brain, but this suggests otherwise.
Now let's continue to read because this is interesting, because I also believe that. I know the hippocampus plays a huge role in where memory is stored and how memory is interpreted, but it isn't the only place. Memory's all over the brain, and that's brings in a topic of neurogenesis, which is really cool. It's how cells are made in the brain, but we won't touch on that because that gets too into the details of neuroscience.
The nitty-gritty.
Yeah, so we think parts of the brain used to actually perceive an object and to imagine an object overlap. And this is a Northwestern University scientist, Kenneth Pauler. Thus, the vividly imagined event can lead a memory trace in the brain that is similar to that of an experienced event. So now they're saying it does overlap, and it's something that is difficult to discern the difference between. Would you like to continue from there, Abe?
Sure. So the article continues, the memory trace is, of course, chemical. And that's what you were saying, that whenever the memories start forming, there's a lot of this chemical exchange between the neurons. Memories are stored with the formation of particular proteins in the brain. Each time a memory is recalled, the proteins can be reformed or modified. How this process works is a research question of great interest to neuroscientists. Now, before I continue, do you ever think about going to research, into memory research? Like perhaps this question itself.
You're asking me personally?
Yes.
I absolutely love memory research because it's applicable in any sense, in every sense, and in everything we do. However, because technology is still further behind and memory is so finicky, it's hard to discern any sort of positive or substantial results of memory besides, the basic tests and the basic psychology tests that test, your short-term and long-term memory.
Right.
It's very difficult to really get into the details. And now that technology is improving, it is becoming more and more efficient and much more substantial, but it's not quite there yet.
It hasn't caught up yet to the complexity involved.
Of course, we are nowhere near the complexity of the brain.
So this week, researchers affiliated with a project, so this week as in that week,
which was a couple years ago.
Researchers affiliated with a project at MIT reported a giant step toward explaining how external stimuli can distort mental representations to produce brand new, seemingly accurate, but completely false memories. Completely false memories, but they're seemingly accurate. And how does that work?
So that's, again, the concept that we're discussing where there's an example that's given. So participants are told of a time they had back when they were a kid where they got lost in a parking structure. And they, are talking to the kid about it, and they ask them later on in their life, did this occur? And their parents can recall it did not occur, this event did not occur, and they are sure of it because they've discussed it with them prior. But the kids believe this event to be true. They hold this event in their life as fact.
When it was completely
when
made
it was
up?
made up completely. And it's very...
So that's how external stimuli could actually distort memories and trick us into thinking that, oh, this event actually did happen.
Exactly. So then Steve Ramirez and his colleagues used a combination of optical and genetic techniques to control the activity of individual neurons in the brain of specially bred experimental mice. So the researchers studied a group of brain cells in the hippocampal region. Oh, this special bred group of rats is a group where they can it's hard to explain, but they implant this gene inside a mouse. Many meese. And after they breed, this gene is expressed in their neurons, and they can get a neuron to be activated by a visual representation. So if I were to shine a blue light, it would activate these neurons, and if I shine a red light, it would activate these other neurons. And it's a very scary idea that you can activate specific neurons by the gene that you implant in these mice. But it's a similar process that they're doing for this experiment.
Sounds really cool, though.
Cool and scary tend to coincide in science. The research studied a group of brain cells in the hippocampal region, so the region of memory, of the mouse brain. They found that they could create false associations between events, environments by artificially stimulating the neurons. So again, artificially stimulating whether by light or a shock. And so when certain of the hippocampal cells were activated, mice remembered a shock in a place where they had never been shocked before. So they kind of make the mice think that there's this sensory input that there isn't actually, even though they don't physically see it. The neurons responsible for interpreting it are activated, and so they believe it to be true.
Interesting.
Then again, mice are less intelligent, so they can't really form that association. You'd hope we could, right?
That's what I was thinking. And then it continues by saying, specifically, Ramirez and his team identified particular cells that were activated by foot shocks in a particular environment. Then they moved the mice to another, shock-free environment and stimulated those same neurons. This reactivation of the neurons that fired when the mice were shocked caused the mice to freeze, a natural response to fear, even when no shock was given. So they did the experiment. They put the mice in a room, and then they shocked them, and they sort of fired these specific neurons, and then they moved the mice, put them in a shock-free cage, and then they activated those memories, or the neurons that are linked with that memory. And so when the implanted memories happen to be false, the still acted as though there was a shock present.
So that concludes that article. When we'd like to thank Ramirez, the team that worked on the study, and Bryony Faith, a PhD candidate, for producing this article. Now, I'd like to talk about the process of forgetting once again. I'd like to bring up, how does short-term memory and long-term memory loss work? So let's say I have short-term memory loss. What does that mean, Abe?
Well, for a computer, I can tell you, but for us, I'm not so sure. I'm waiting on you.
Well, what happens in the computer when it doesn't have short-term memory?
Well, if a computer loses short-term memory, then the string of zeros and ones that's present in the RAM is sort of distorted. It's just,
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Now, if I were to have long-term short-term memory loss, that means I can't remember things that happen in my direct process.
Vicinity.
Yeah, my direct field of vision. I don't consolidate those memories. So although I can see you and talk to you and we're like, hey, Abe, what's going on? How you doing? How's the weather? And we can talk. Beyond that, I will never remember that we had that conversation. And so although my long-term memory is intact, and my long-term memory knows the past and my name and everything that I had prior to that event where I got short-term memory loss, I can't consolidate that information.
So there's sort of like a blockade from your short-term to your long-term?
Right, and so they have studies trying to test how long someone can last with short-term memory. So they tell them the situation, and they tell them that it's crucial that they remember a string of numbers. And they sit there and they're repeating the numbers themselves and repeating. And after 10, 15 minutes, which is a very long time, some patients are still able to hold those digits, but at that point they've forgotten why they are doing it. And when asked what were the digits, they may be able to recreate them, they may not, but they don't know why. And it's very interesting because there's this really cool study, and this is the study that I think has the most significance. My name is Dr. D, and I'm walking in to say hi to you. So I shake your hand.
Hello.
And you have short-term memory loss. I'm checking on my patient. But I prick you with a needle.
Ow.
That hurts, right?
Yeah.
You're a little upset. Like, why would I do that?
Why?
Okay. I walk out of the room. Wait a couple minutes, maybe 15 minutes. I come back. Hi, I'm Dr. D.
Hello.
You don't remember me. You don't remember anything. I prick you with the needle again.
Ow.
Same reaction. Why'd you do that?
Why do you do that?
Exactly. Thank you, Abe. And let's say I repeat that maybe 1 or 2 more times. The 5th time comes around. Hi, my name's Dr. D. You hesitate. You don't want to shake my hand. And it's interesting because this becomes functional memory, which has very little, or not very little, which has a separate association than your active memory. So you have this idea that you shouldn't be, this fear, this danger that I'm going to harm you in some way, and you refuse to shake my hand.
Right.
But you don't remember why. You don't know why. You just know you shouldn't.
So even though the memory did not go from short-term to long-term, it stayed in the functional area?
Exactly. And that applies to a lot of different skills. So let's say I'm asked to do this task where I have to draw or trace something. And there's a lot of psychological tasks that ask you to test your functional memory or test your functional skills. And so you'll try it, and you'll go through this process, and you'll do okay. And then you'll be asked to do it again and again. And although you don't remember ever doing the test prior, you will actually improve at it. And your accuracy will improve, and your skills will improve, and your functional memory will improve, although you have no memory of it with this short-term memory loss. It's absolutely incredible.
Now, one sec. Let me be clear about this functional memory. Is it the same kind of memory that sort of governs how I ride a bike or play piano, or does it have to do with certain actions of my body, or is it more related to sort of reactions to something?
Now, reactions are more biologically driven. Those, reflex is something that'll always be kind of ingrained in us biologically. But yeah, I would say
it's different than functional. The functional memory is something else.
Yeah, it's something as though it's like riding a bike. You never forget how to ride a bike, right? That's the expression, at least. It's a task that you've been able to improve upon, but it's a physical task. It's not recalling something in your active memory. It's not recalling how you may have gotten that skill, but that you
just can do it.
You can produce that skill.
Okay.
It shows a lot about how interesting short-term memory loss is, and how consolidation isn't the end-all to how your memories and skills are consolidated. It shows that practicing a skill every day, although you may not realize it, although you may not notice it, but practicing and redoing and kind of keeping at something can improve your ability to do it, even if you have no recollection of it.
That's whack. So that's for short-term memory and sort of problems there. What about long-term memory? What if there's something wrong with the long-term memory?
Well, with long-term memory, it's a lot less interesting. It's more cut and dry. Long-term memory means you can't remember anything prior to a certain amount of time. And, you can't remember your previous memories.
Right.
And your short-term memories are the only thing you really have. It's
So,
like, oh, who am I? Oh, I'm this. Cool. Hi, hello. Oh, hey, who am I? And that's all you have is that short-term memory.
So if the long-term memory is damaged, then the short-term memory is not affected, and vice versa, right?
Right. Your active short-term memory, that's always kind of there. And although you might be able to remember slightly less numbers, like let's say you can remember 7 digits, now you can remember 6. That's situational. That's very different. But no, that actual active memory is not affected between the two.
Interesting.
It's cool stuff. Do you have any questions, my friend?
Oh, I have a lot. So we talked about the tip of the tongue syndrome, and we talked about short-term memory, talked about long-term memory. We talked about misremembering things. Do you still have anything to talk about when it comes to memory?
Well, we've been talking a lot about these detrimental ideas of memory being this unreliable and scary thing, and memory being able to be abused, and we haven't really talked about the positives. So I'd like to take a short break. We're going to hit our intermission right now, but I would love to show you guys this video, this TED Talk. It's called A Lollipop Moment. It's very important to me. It kind of shows you the impact that you can really have on somebody without even realizing it. So I'm going to put you guys on a quick intermission, and we'll be back. Abe, do you have any final words?
Yeah, so final words before we take intermission. Bilal, do you remember that $100?
No, I'm never going to remember that $100. All right, we'll see you soon, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From Atoms
Wait,
to...
wait, wait, Abe.
What?
I think we already did that.
Wait, we did?
Yeah,
Oh.
I think you forgot.
Dang, it's my amnesia.
Oh, it's that memory, finicky as always.
I know, right?
Well, we've got a treat for you today. It is the video we discussed right before intermission. It's called the Lollipop Moment, TED Ed Talk. And here, we'll load it up right now. And we'll have our lovely sound engineer, David, play the video.
I want to start by asking everyone in the audience here a question. How many of you are completely comfortable with calling yourselves a leader? See, I've asked that question all the way across the country, and everywhere I ask it, no matter where, there's always a huge portion of the audience that won't put up their hand. And I've come to realize that we have made leadership into something bigger than us. We made it into something beyond us. We made it about changing the world. And we've taken this title of leader and we treat it as if it's something that one day we're going to deserve. But to give it to ourselves right now means a level of arrogance or cockiness that we're not comfortable with. And I worry sometimes that we spend so much time celebrating amazing things that hardly anybody can do that we've convinced ourselves that those are the only things we're celebrating. And we start to devalue the things that we can do every day. And we start to take moments where we truly are a leader and we don't let ourselves take credit for it and we don't let ourselves feel good about it. And I've been lucky enough over the last 10 years to work with some amazing people who have helped me redefine leadership in a way that I think has made me happier. And with my short time today, I just want to share with you the one story that is probably most responsible for that redefinition. I went to a school in a little school called Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. And on my last day there, a girl came up to me and she said, "I remember the first time that I met you." And then she told me a story that happened 4 years earlier. She said, "On my day before I started university, I was in the hotel room with my mom and my dad. And I was so scared and so convinced that I couldn't do this, that I wasn't ready for university, that I just burst into tears. And my mom and my dad were amazing. They were like, 'Look, we know you're scared, but let's just go tomorrow. Let's go to the first day. And if at any point you feel as if you can't do this, that's fine. Just tell us, we will take you home. We love you no matter what.' And she says, so I went the next day and I was standing in line getting ready for registration and I looked around and I just knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't ready. I knew I had to quit. And she says, I made that decision and as soon as I made it, there was this incredible feeling of peace that came over me. And I turned to my mom and my dad to tell them that we needed to go home. And just at that moment, you came out of the Student Union building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen in my life. It was awesome. And you had a big sign promoting Shinorama, which is Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, a charity I've worked with for years. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking along and you were handing the lollipops out to people in line and talking about Shinorama. And all of a sudden, you got to me and you just stopped and you stared. It was creepy. This girl right here knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then you looked at the guy next to me and you smiled and you reached in your bucket, you pulled out a lollipop and you held it out to him. And you said, you need to give a lollipop to the beautiful woman standing next to you. And she said, I have never seen anyone get more embarrassed faster in my life. He turned beet red, and he wouldn't even look at me. He just kind of held the lollipop out like this. And I felt so bad for this dude that I took the lollipop. And as soon as I did, you got this incredibly severe look on your face, and you looked at my mom and my dad, and you said, look at that. Look at that. First day away from home, and already she's taking candy from a stranger. And she said, everybody lost it. 20 feet in every direction, everyone started to howl. And I know this is cheesy, and I don't know why I'm telling you this. But in that moment when everyone was laughing, I knew that I shouldn't quit. I knew that I was where I was supposed to be, and I knew that I was home. And I haven't spoken to you once in the 4 years since that day, but I heard that you were leaving. And I had to come up and tell you that you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and I'm gonna miss you. Good luck. And she walks away, and I'm flattened. And she gets about 6 feet away, she turns around and smiles and goes, you should probably know this too. I'm still dating that guy 4 years later. A year and a half after I moved to Toronto, I got an invitation to their wedding. Here's the kicker, I don't remember that. I have no recollection of that moment, and I've searched my memory banks because that is funny, and I should remember doing it, and I don't remember it. And that was such an eye-opening, transformative moment for me to think that maybe the biggest impact I'd ever had on anyone's life, a moment that had a woman walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you've been an incredibly important person in my life, was a moment that I didn't even remember. How many of you guys have a lollipop moment, a moment where someone said something or did something that you feel fundamentally made your life better? All right. How many of you have told that person they did it? See, why not? We celebrate birthdays where all you have to do is not die for 365 days. And yet we let people who have made our lives better walk around without knowing it. And every single one of you,
So that was Lollipop Moment with Drew Dudley. Now, I want to share that with you guys because it shows the impact that memory can have on some and not affect anyone else around them. That lollipop moment, it's significant, but it shows the positive effects of memory and how, although something that I will never remember, like how me and Abe met, and yet the impact that it had on our friendship is, way substantial beyond the memory itself.
By the way, it was at Albasha's.
You say that, but we never know.
We'll just ask Sal.
Does he know?
I don't know.
I don't remember. So, to relate this back to memory, I think in a philosophical sense, Descartes always had a way to discuss the difference between the mind and memory itself. So the body, the physical, the brain, the mind, the brain, the neurons, all the chemicals and the, what physical components we have, and then the mind itself, which is more abstract thought, a more
right. Whenever Descartes gets into the picture, things become fun because whenever you talk about Descartes, then immediately you start talking about his meditations, his epistemology, his metaphysics, and most importantly, his philosophy of mind. And perhaps he's the most well-known philosopher that argued for what's known as substance dualism. And so that's just a fancy philosophical term, and all it means is that there are two types of things out there in the world. There's the things that he called res cogitans, which is a fancy Latin term that means sort of mind stuff. And then there's the other type of thing that he called res extensa, which is another fancy Latin term, which means that the extended bodies outside of the mind stuff.
These are a lot of fancy Latin terms. I don't know if I can translate all of these. Let me check my RAM.
So, bringing it into English, the English language.
Thanks.
Descartes was arguing for this separation of mind and body.
It's like a soul.
Exactly, like a soul. You are not. So, whenever you're conscious, you have these feelings, you have these thoughts, you have these memories. There is some relation to the body, but the mind is distinct from the body. It's not generated by it. It's sort of like a piano playing a pianist playing the piano, and so the pianist is distinct from the piano, but without the pianist, there's no music, right?
Huh.
And without the piano, there is no music as well.
So you need each
both,
other, but
the pianist and the piano to produce the music.
the mind and the body.
The mind and the body, in order to have this functioning human in the way that we have it. Now, that's substance dualism, and it got a lot of criticism from sort of the naturalistic philosophers, people who think that there is nothing beyond the natural world. There's nothing beyond the physical world. Everything that exists is pretty much physical. It's governed by the laws of physics.
Mm-hmm.
And so they sort of rejected Descartes' idea on that basis, and they were arguing that, okay, look, Descartes, you have these two substances, but you're not really telling us how they interact. I mean, okay, we have a brain. We know that certain actions that we do they start at the brain. So how are you telling us that there is this soul that influences the brain? And Descartes did not really have a satisfying answer for them, which is why this idea did not convince many naturalists. And so they favored this other idea called physicalism, which sort of says that whenever you're conscious, whenever you're perceiving something, all of that emerges from the brain itself. So it's sort of, whenever you talk about emergence, you mean that the whole is more than its parts, right? Something exists for the whole that doesn't exist for its parts. A very famous example of this would be something like temperature. You could talk about the temperature of water, right, in a beaker, but you're really talking about temperature of 10 to the 23 or more molecules, right? But if you're talking about a single molecule, then temperature really does not make sense. So temperature is sort of this quantity that is called an emergent quantity. It exists for the whole, but it does not exist for the part. And
That's a very interesting way to look at it and relate it back to physics. No, that's interesting. So it's saying that it only applies to the entire whole, not the specific parts, not the specific thoughts, but the
exactly.
entirety
So a
of
single
itself.
neuron is not conscious. Two neurons are not conscious. It's only when you group them
Four
together.
neurons are a nibble.
And 8 of them are a bite. It's only when they get grouped together in a certain configuration that this thing called consciousness arises. And that's the view of physicalism. Now, what's interesting is that there's another view called panpsychism. And this is like...
Oof, that's a panpsychism?
Yeah, the wackiest of them all. So I was saying that with physicalism, it's mainly sort of an emergent thing. The whole has something that each part does not.
Mm-hmm.
But with panpsychism, you actually have the parts having the property as well. So on the view of panpsychism, even even inanimate objects possess some sort of consciousness to them. Sort of like, so you have height, you have these properties like height, mass, all different types of properties.
So physical characteristics of an object?
Right, so how they view it is that take all the characteristics known in physics, and then you just got to add to them this thing called consciousness, a new property in the world, and you got to take it as a fundamental thing. It exists, and you got to accept it.
So everything has consciousness.
Everything has consciousness, but not in the same way. Rocks have consciousness, but that does not mean that they are conscious.
Vegetables.
Yes, everything.
Oh no!
A
Someone
single-
tell the vegetarians. This is not going to end well.
We just opened a can of worms.
Well, no, you can't because they have consciousness too.
They do. Even the can does.
Come on.
There's no escaping.
So is this idea that they have the ability of consciousness, but it's not necessarily there?
The way I understand it, it's sort of a level. Yeah, it's sort of levels of consciousness. The way our brains, they argue, the way our brains are structured, it allows for the maximal appearance of consciousness. And
That's interesting because it can be related to the way we view cognition and how we have this higher thought than other species because of the way our brain's set up, so that it can kind of interpret, I guess, consciousness in the way that you're describing it, but in the way it's described in neuroscience, at least, it's the way the brain functions as a whole, how all its parts, although size doesn't matter, because you have blue whales where their brains are the size of SUVs, and then you have, our brains, which are much smaller, but they're more densely packed with neurons, and it's based on that dense package and this larger forebrain that gives us that higher level thought and that
sort of
perception
the
of our
structure
consciousness.
and interplay
Right.
between them.
I think it's that extra, and this could be argued, but I think it's that extra layer of complexity that is what's perceived as consciousness.
That would be a good point for the panpsychists.
Yep.
I just fail to see how it would translate to any object. And
Well, the rocks, they're pretty cool.
they are pretty cool. They have
So-
consciousness.
I guess so. So I'm trying to wrap my head around how they just exist. Consciousness exists at the same level for everything.
Right. The same way, so you have a property, a fundamental property like a mass, right? The same way mass is a fundamental property, they argue that consciousness should be treated as a fundamental property of the world.
Well, then would you say they would believe my finger is conscious?
Yes.
Would they believe my toe is conscious?
Yes.
Are they separately conscious or are they conjointly conscious?
I think they're separately conscious. In the way let's clarify that when we say your finger is conscious, that does not mean it's aware of itself the same way we are. It just means that it possesses the property of consciousness, whatever that means. The same way like an atom possesses mass and different atoms possess different masses.
So then would every neuron have its own, I guess, possibility of consciousness?
Yeah, it would have this property of consciousness, but it may have a different, say, value.
but then how many neurons does it take to achieve consciousness? What is the threshold of consciousness?
I think if you ask a panpsychist that question, they would say, we're working on it.
All right, so it's disregarded. I guess not as very...
it's not developed as well as the other theories, because it's sort of a modern idea, especially when you bring...
It's a modern idea? I could see it in an ancient sense or an older sense, but as a modern idea, it reached its point. I think we just argued it to its limit, and if there's no answer, then it doesn't stand.
And it's a modern idea in the sense that there has been a sort of revival in the idea in the philosophy
community. Flat Earth, because that's Flat Earth has been a revival, quote unquote.
No, but this one is taken seriously in academic circles. Well, I should say that some philosophers take it seriously, and especially David Chalmers, who is a very well-known philosopher of mind, and he is trying to argue for consciousness through physics and sort of invoking panpsychism. And it's a whole different story about how he would start doing that, but that's maybe a topic for a different time.
Well, thank you for discussing the principles of Descartes. It definitely shows that there is a difference between, or at least he believes there's a difference between the physical mind and the mental mind and the physical body. Yeah. And maybe that's what contributes to our memory. Maybe it's that mind that we cannot see that kind of...
It's the pianist.
It's the pianist that exists that, doesn't exactly work without each other. Like, they need each other. That's a very interesting thought. I will leave that to the audience to mull on. And we are reaching the end of our show for this evening. So I would like to remind everyone out there, don't forget about Safe Walks. Safe Walks is the program that Wayne State has for anyone who's walking home late at night from a class, anything that you're kind of worried about. If you're in a dangerous environment, you can call the Wayne State Police, and they're not an emergency number, which I want to say is 577-2424, and you can give them a ring, and you'll be able to talk to them about getting you a ride somewhere or walking with you to make sure that you're safe, whether it's to your car, to your dorm. And it's a very nice service that Wayne State offers and kind of keeps the campus safe, especially with things that have been going on recently. We want to make sure that everyone is feeling nice and safe in our campus. So make sure to give it a try. Again, it's Safe Walks. Contact the Wayne State Police at their non-emergency number. And that will be our show for this evening. Abe, final comments.
What were we talking about today?
I swear to God, if your memory fails you one more time, we were talking about memory today, Abe.
Oh, right. Exactly. I thought it was pretty fascinating the way short-term and long-term memories work, and how the interplay between functional memory, short-term memory, long-term memory comes into play.
I find it fascinating, and I'm glad I was able to talk about it, and you indulged me with this heavy neuroscience talk that we've had today. So we look forward to having you guys next week. I look forward to episode 4 of From Atoms to Axons, and episode 5?
I think we're at 5.
I keep forgetting. Episode X. And we'll see you on the next episode. Have a wonderful evening, ladies and gentlemen.